The woman suddenly received a phone call from herself, 20 years in the future. It told her 3 secrets. The first was that her husband had already betrayed her. It urged her to divorce her husband as soon as possible. The second was that the 2 children she had adopted were actually the children of her husband and his mistress. It told her to prepare in advance. The third was to advise her to buy a house immediately, as many as possible. The woman's first reaction was disbelief, because she had been married to her husband for 20 years, and they had always been loving toward each other. But this phone call still unsettled her heart. She asked her best friend, who was sitting beside her, whether her husband could possibly betray her. Her friend held her hand and told her not to overthink it. Her husband loved her deeply. He could never betray her. Just then, her husband came home from work and brought roasted duck, just because the night before, she had casually mentioned wanting to eat roasted duck. He had remembered it in his heart. The woman was touched. At the same time, she felt guilty. Her husband treated her so well, yet she had doubted him just because of a strange phone call. But just as she helped her husband take off his coat, she noticed that on his clothes was a strand of long hair from another woman. The woman couldn't help but recall that phone call again. But at that moment, her adopted daughter came back home and threw her arms around her father, acting spoiled. The woman comforted herself, thinking that the hair must belong to her adopted daughter. At that moment, her adopted daughter turned to her mother and asked her to tell her uncle to get her 2 concert tickets. The woman advised her that the college entrance exams were coming soon, and she should focus on her studies. But the adopted daughter immediately shoved her mother, angrily blaming her for being too stingy. She even said her mother couldn't have children of her own, and had adopted her, so she should spend all her money on her. Her adopted daughter's attitude once again unsettled her heart. Her husband quickly scolded the girl and told his wife not to take a child's words to heart. The adopted daughter immediately apologized to her mother, saying that she'd been too stressed with studying lately, so her temper was bad. She hugged her mother, and the woman's worries were once again set aside. The next day, at the dining table, her husband told her that he had run into some trouble while running for chief inspector. His rival had an uncle in a leadership position, so he needed her 2 older brothers to help. At that moment, their adopted son walked over. The man told his wife again that their adopted son was about to graduate from college and suggested sending him to his uncle's company for an internship. With his uncle's support, his future would be secure. The woman told her adopted son that he was still young and shouldn't always think about relying on connections. He needed to gain more experience on his own, but the adopted son immediately scowled, accusing his mother of refusing to help him. He didn't even eat his meal and stormed off. The woman once again thought of that phone call and became uneasy again. She decided to investigate where that call had come from. She asked her friend to go with her to check the phone records, but the staff told her that the system was under maintenance recently and the detailed records couldn't be accessed, so the woman had no choice but to leave. That night, her husband said he had a meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. Feeling bored by herself, she went out for a walk. But on the road, she saw her husband driving his car, and in the passenger seat sat another woman. She told the driver to follow her husband's car. The car stopped at the entrance of a hotel. The woman got out and followed her husband and saw him walk into a room. He had claimed he was at a meeting, yet had come to a place like this. Furious, she pushed the door open, but the room was pitch dark. While she was still puzzled, the lights came on. Her adopted son and daughter stood there holding party poppers. Then, her husband came out from the back, pushing a cart. On the cart was a big cake and a bouquet of fresh flowers. Her husband picked up the flowers and handed them to her, saying that today was their wedding anniversary. He had lied about the meeting to surprise her. The woman was moved to tears. Her husband wiped away her tears and said he had planned to have their adopted daughter bring her over later, but hadn't expected her to find the place on her own. He teased, asking if she had already guessed he was preparing this surprise. The woman felt even more guilty. She apologized to her husband, saying she shouldn't have suspected him of betrayal, but her husband didn't blame her. He said she only did it because she cared about him, and that he would only cherish her more. Her husband asked her to make a wish. The woman made a wish to the cake, hoping their family could always live happily like this. Looking at her husband and the 2 children's smiling faces, the woman told herself that she would no longer let that phone call affect her. She would cherish the life she had now. A few days later, her friend came to see her and handed her a file folder, saying she had found out the system was fixed, and the phone records from the past year for her household were all in there. But the woman said she didn't want to check anymore. She no longer suspected her husband. Seeing that she refused to look, Her friend opened the folder for her. Her friend saw that the man had been in frequent contact with a certain phone number, and that the number looked very familiar. The woman explained that it must be the cake shop's number, because her husband had told her that he had been calling the shop often recently to order her an imported cream cake. He had been in touch with the cake shop all along. A few days later, the wife went to her husband's office to find him, wanting to discuss asking her two brothers to help him in the election for chief inspector. But just as she reached the office door, she heard a woman's voice inside. She pushed the door open just a crack and saw her husband passionately kissing another woman. Then, her husband said to that woman that on their wedding anniversary, luckily he had reacted quickly, or else his wife would have discovered their affair. Only then did the woman know for sure that all her suspicions these past days were true. That phone call had been real, but she quickly calmed herself without alerting them. Instead, she gently closed the door for them. The woman first went to her friend and asked her to find out who owned the number her husband had been frequently calling. Then she returned home and took out her bank book. The next day, she had her friend accompany her to look at houses. The woman decided to follow the advice of her future self, not only to prepare in advance, but also to make her husband and his mistress pay a heavy price. At this moment, the woman did not yet know that while she and her friend were looking at houses, there was a man sitting nearby, his gaze fixed intently on her.